Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video and welcome to the very first TBR of 2024. That's right, we are officially in January, which is probably one of my favorite reading months of the year. I just feel so motivated. I feel like I have so many books to choose from. It's just a very exciting time. That being said though, pinpointing exactly what I wanted to read this month was actually a little bit hard. So I would describe my TBR as both ambitious but confused. I'm kind of all over the place in terms of my selections, but nevertheless, I'm looking forward to all of the books I have selected for myself. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. The first two books I'm going to show off are my two current reads and the books I'm starting out the year with. First one being This Is How You Lose a Time War. This is like a fantasy meets literary fiction story, described as like a very unusual read, but does center a sapphic love story. And I can say, because I've already started this read, is very, very unusual, but in all of my favorite ways. We're basically following our two main characters, Red and Blue, and they exist on two different sides of a time war that has existed, it seems, maybe since the beginning of time. Both of these sides basically traverse all of these different timelines and worlds, trying to push through and also thwart the other's plans for the world itself. Red and Blue are each side's best agents, and they also begin to communicate via letters along the way, and through these letters they also begin to form a relationship. This book is very strange, but I feel like it works so well. Not only is it set on a backdrop of really fascinating worlds and time periods, you're never quite sure where you're going to end up or how Red and Blue are going to communicate with each other next, but I think my favorite part of this book has to be the letters. They're just beautiful and full of love and just two people getting to know each other, and it's just very, very mesmerizing and such an interesting contrast to this very like sci-fi, fantasy, time travel setting. Anyway, I'm reading this now. I'm really enjoying it, and obviously I do plan to finish this book this month. It's also not very long. I also just felt like it was a perfect book to start the year off with. The next book I plan to read at the very beginning of the month is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. This is a very beloved, very lauded, like lyrical romantic fantasy story, which in general is a combination that I really like. I know technically this is a sister series to Stephanie Garber's other works, but personally I just feel like I'm going to start here because this synopsis just calls out to me the most, and I do know that this can be a starting place. But this story centers our main character who's in love, but unfortunately for her, at the beginning of this book, the love of her life is marrying someone else, but she does not want to give up, so she decides to turn to like a supernatural force to help her prevent this from happening. But obviously making a deal with someone of supernatural powers is not going to be a very straightforward process, described as whimsical and lyrical and full of love and heart. I just feel like this is going to be a very endearing story and a perfect one to kick off the year with. The next book that's on my TBR is more of a start but possibly not finish option, and that is The Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. As I've mentioned recently, I completed the two final books within this final trilogy by Robin Hobb near the tail end of 2023, and I want to continue that momentum and finish this third and final installment. I am not ready, but I am more ready than I was recently, so I feel like I'm going to get there in the end, if you know what I mean. I don't anticipate that I will finish this 800-page long fantasy book this month, especially because I have some other longer books on this TBR, but I do want to start it and just continue that momentum of finishing the final Fitz and the Fool trilogy and just see where Fitz is going to end up in this final installment. I love Fitz. There's no character in fantasy that I probably love more than Fitz, and also hurts my heart more than Fitz, so, you know. It's a give and take relationship. Next book that's on my list is The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. This is a book I picked up recently, but I've also been meaning and wanting to read for so long. So many people love this book. So many people grew up with this book, including my brother. This is a book my brother has loved for a long time and has been trying to get me to read for a long time, but I finally feel like I'm ready to do it. I also feel like this book is full of so many tropes that I know and love, but this is a story that centers a unicorn. At the beginning of this book, she leaves her magical forest to begin a quest to try to find others just like her. Along the way, she picks up unexpected individuals and also begins to confront the beauty and sorrows of life. I feel like this is going to be emotional, beautiful, and in many ways, this book is just kind of like a cornerstone of fantasy, so I'm just looking forward to finally getting to it. And I'm also just really in love with these new covers that came out recently, so I'm just happy I have this on my shelf, and I'm so looking forward to picking this book up. Next is a little bit of an unexpected TBR ad. I wasn't sure if I was ever going to read this book. For a long time, it was on my no list, but with the upcoming release of Crescent City #3, and due to the events of Crescent City #2, I just feel like I want to be completely up to date with S.J. Maz's works before that final installment, for better or for worse, in terms of how I feel about it. And that book is A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. I am interested to read this book. I don't know if I want to say the word excited. I'm obviously hoping I like it, but if I'm being transparent, I've obviously read a lot of her books over the course of my YouTube channel, but recently a lot of her newer releases have fallen flat for me, but they have kept me interested enough where I just keep going. So this book is super long and I'm nervous that I'm not going to like it. That being said though, I've had a lot of people in my real life and obviously online reviewers that I trust say that they actually liked this book quite a bit, and I'm hoping I like it as well. I obviously did not like Crescent City #2 at all. And I'm just hoping this will kind of put me back on track in terms of liking this world that S.J. Maas has created. And obviously this is the 5th installment to the ACOTAR series and follows our main character Nesta and her storyline and her love story. And obviously we run into some characters that we also know from ACOTAR. It's been a minute since I've been in the ACOTAR world and universe and have been around these characters. So maybe with time and space, I will enjoy this a bit more. But I'm curious about this. I do plan to read and vlog the experience, and then obviously with Crescent City #3 coming out at the end of the month, that'll probably carry me into February. You know, we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. And the next book that's on my TBR is The Deep Sky by Yumi Kitasai, another recent pickup and a book I feel like I've just been seeing on so many different favorites lists, which is also why it's been calling out to me so much. This just sounds like a super intense sci-fi story that I also feel like has so many different inputs that will make me fly through it. This book is set on the eve of Earth's environmental collapse, and as a last-ditch effort, they're basically sending a ship out into space with 80 elite graduates of a program to carry on Earth's legacy as they settle onto a new planet and basically start a new life there. Halfway on this journey, though, a situation happens where 3 of the members of the ship die, and the only person who witnessed this event is our main character Asuka, and she also becomes the prime suspect. From there, everyone is suspicious of her, crewmates begin to turn on one another, and Asuka is trying to solve what happened on this ship. It just sounds really intense, very contemplative, and I love like an isolated space situation. Like nothing good happens on an isolated spaceship. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? The next book on my TBR might be a little bit of a surprise, and that is The Raven Tower by Ann Leckie. It might be a surprise because I recently read Ancillary Justice by this author and loved it. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, shouldn't you be reading book 2 and not a new series by this author? Probably, but for some reason, I'm really interested in picking up Ann Leckie's fantasy release because I loved her sci-fi work so much. I'm just too curious to see how her writing style translates to a different genre. And the concept of this one also just sounds really interesting to me. And I just feel like I'm going to be reading a lot of Ann Leckie this year. So I have space to also add this series to my TBR. And this is set in a kingdom that for centuries has been protected by the same god. And the synopsis goes, gods meddle in the fates of men, men play with the fates of gods, and a pretender must be cast down from the throne in this masterful first fantasy novel by Ann Leckie. I believe we read from one of the perspectives of these gods in this world, and I'm just so intrigued by this. I love fantasy novels that toy with and explore gods and humans and how those two entities can interact and create conflict and strife. It's just a topic I'm personally always interested in. So I've had this on my shelf for quite a while now, and I just feel like I really want to jump into it this month, and I'm just curious to compare and contrast the reading experiences of the sci-fi and fantasy direction by this author. The next book that's on my TBR I should have gotten to months and months and months and months ago. Basically, this time last year, I started my reread of Mistborn Era 2 and then stopped in the exact same place where I stopped the last time I didn't complete it. With that in mind, I'm really hoping to complete my reread of Bands of Mourning by Brandon Sanderson because I really want to read The Last Metal or The Lost Metal, which is the final book within Era 2, which I have not read at all, and it's now been out for almost 2 years, which feels ridiculous. I've read the Bands of Mourning by this author many years ago, but really enjoyed it. And in particular, I have been consuming this series via audiobook, and it's been a blast. But if you're not familiar, Era 2 is kind of set in a Wild West interpretation of the Mistborn world. It's very much flintlock fantasy, and in it we're following our 2 main characters, Wax and Wayne, who are like investigators of crime. And at the beginning of this book, Wax and Wayne are now back in the big city despite the fact that they don't want to be, and they kind of get pulled into this larger conspiracy. It has a lot of humor, a lot of action, and a really interesting like growth within the Mistborn magic system that keeps things fresh and interesting. The conspiracy of this gets huge. I'm really looking forward to picking up this third book to reread again and also completing the series once and for all. The next book on my TBR is another reread that I abandoned at some point last year that I'm looking to revisit, and that is Harrow the Night by Tamsin Muir. I have read Gideon the Ninth now twice, and I still have yet to pick up the second book and obviously continue on by completing this series. I really enjoyed Gideon the Ninth so much. The narration style, the main character, the bizarreness of not only the genre combination, but also just like the characters and their interactions. Like, I really liked the first one so much, I read it twice, but for some reason I keep sputtering out with my continuation with this series, which I just simply do not understand. But in this series, we're introduced to our main character Gideon, and she has been trapped on this planet called Ninth House her entire life. She lives in this sort of sci-fi fantasy world where necromancy exists, and each planet has their own like form of necromancy, if you will. At the beginning of this book, she makes a pact with her arch nemesis Harrowhawk to basically be her sword companion as Harrowhawk goes as an emissary to this like really important political event. They arrive at this place that's very far away from their planet, and it kind of turns into like a closed door murder mystery competition story. It's so strange and so endearing, and honestly, I'm very nervous for the third time that I might pick up Gideon the Ninth and reread it because I just really like that book so much, and I just want to have like fresh eyes and a fresh perspective on this story. But if I do read Gideon the Ninth, I have to read Harrow the Ninth right away. Otherwise, I'm just going to be trapped in this loop over and over and over again. But Harrow the Ninth is on my TBR. Next up, I have my lone literary fiction selection for the month. I'm really trying to have at least one literary fiction book in every monthly TBR and actually read it because I love literary fiction and I just do not prioritize it as well as I should. But that book is The Book of Goose by Yin Yoon Lee, and this book is another one I picked up recently, and it's just been calling out to me every time at the bookstore, but every time I read the synopsis, as it is a book that centers friendship over a long period of time. This book opens with the announcement that Fabine is dead, and her childhood best friend Agnes hears this news all the way in America, and Fabine was actually instrumental with getting Agnes to America so many years ago. Agnes and Fabine grew up together in the war-torn countryside of France post-World War II, created a world for themselves in only the way that children can. This is also the time where they both created a plan to get Agnes over to America to create a new life for herself, which she did. I think this is a very contemplative novel, shifting between the past and the present, and again, centering this friendship. I've heard amazing things about this book. I've also just been wanting to read a book by this author quite a bit. The cover is also stunning, which I try to say doesn't sway me in my decision making, but it always does a little bit. But nevertheless, I also hope to get to this book as well. And the last book that's on my January TBR is kind of a heartwarming fantasy option, at least for me, and that is Rise of the Empire by Michael J. Sullivan. This, of course, is book 2 to the Raya Revelations series, and I'm really wanting to continue my momentum with reading Michael J. Sullivan books throughout this year and probably into next year, as obviously I love the Legends of the First Empire. I don't imagine I'll read as many books by him this year, but nevertheless, if I could just kind of finish at least the Raya Revelations, that would be fantastic. In this series, we're introduced to our main characters, Royce and Hadrian, who are kind of these lovable mercenary characters. They're BFFs, they have great banter, they have great humor. And in book 1, they're basically dragged into a conspiracy when they're paid to steal a sword, which kind of frames them for the murder of the king, and everything begins to escalate from there. This has a lot of Easter eggs from Legends of the First Empire, but I think technically you're supposed to start here. But I have been enjoying the reading experience of starting with Legends first, but that's just me. This is a series that I like but don't love, but for some reason I find the tropiness and kind of typical nature of the narrative to be a very comforting experience. Like, it's just fun and not too much of a lift for me to read this book. And because I like the characters and the narrative style, I just find it to be like an easy read, even though the topics are dark. Like, this isn't cozy, but for some reason it's like cozy to me. Hopefully that makes sense. Alrighty guys, that is my January TBR. Please let me know down below some books you hope to get to this month, as I would love to know. And I hope to see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye.